On this edition of Early Look, I'm going to be previewing the UFC 314 featherweight fight between former interim champion Yair Rodriguez and Patricio Pitbull Freire. My name is James Lynch. If you never watched the show before, I'm going to go through a bunch of different stats, a bunch of different intangibles, and then I'm going to give you my prediction at the end of this video. Watch till the end of this video, then give me your prediction for this fight. We can have a good discussion in the comments about this one, as we usually do. Let's do a quick tale of the tape. Again, this fight going to be taking place April 12th as part of that stacked event headlined by Alex Volkanovski and Diego Lopez for the vacant featherweight title. So if you look at it here, 32 years old for Yair Rodriguez, 37 for Patricio Pitbull Freire, 5'11 to 5'6, 71 to 65. So not only is Yair Rodriguez going to be a lot younger, he's also going to be bigger in this spot. Of course, Pitbull making his UFC debut after a long career in Bellator, and we'll get into all that in a second. But let's start first with El Pantera, the former UFC interim featherweight champion. You can see there 19-5 record. And by the way, this fight is 3 rounds. I really think a fight like this should be 5 rounds, but it is 3 rounds. So you can see there Yair Rodriguez 19-5. He's got 8 knockouts, 5 submissions, and 6 decisions. He's currently ranked number 5 in the division. I mentioned it there, 32 years old, 5'11 with a 71-inch reach. He'll be 5 years younger. He's going to have a 5-inch height and 5.5-inch reach advantage in this fight. I mentioned him being the former interim champion. He also won the Ultimate Fighter Latin America. He's got Fight of the Night 5 times in his UFC career. He's also got Performance of the Night 4 times against Andre Fili, BJ Penn, the Korean Zombie, and Josh Emmett. He's also tied with the Korean Zombie for most post-fight bonuses in UFC featherweight division history at 9. The accolades speak for itself. And as far as Yair Rodriguez's overall career goes, he did not have an amateur debut, went straight to the pros in January of 2011, made his UFC debut as part of the Ultimate Fighter Latin America way back in November of 2014, so over a decade. He's amassed a 10-4 record in the UFC, including 5 stoppage victories. Some notable wins for Rodriguez. A lot of people forget about this fight. Dan Hooker beat him 10 years ago in October of 2015, got a win there. Obviously, Hooker competing in the lightweight division now. You got Andre Fili, that was a good win. Alex Caceres was ranked at one point. Got to mention BJ Penn. Obviously, BJ Penn was not the BJ that you were used to seeing back in 2017. Still a notable win there. We can't forget the Korean Zombie knockout in a fight that he was probably losing and ends up getting the knockout win with a second left in the fight. You got Jeremy Stevens. The 2 fights with him ended up getting a win in the rematch. First fight was a no contest. Has the win over Brian Ortega, and then Josh Emmett finished him. That was a very good victory. That was the interim title fight where he ends up capturing interim gold in that one. And then some notable losses include Frankie Edgar, Max Holloway, Alex Volkanovski, and most recently Brian Ortega, which was his last fight. So been in there with some of the best, and again, pretty impressive record there at 10-4 with the UFC. He's had a bunch of layoffs in his career. We're not going to go through all of them because he's been in the UFC, like I said, for over a decade. But we'll go to some of the more recent ones. So if you go from the second Jeremy Stevens fight, which was back in 2019, to the Max Holloway fight, there was a 751-day layoff in that, right? So it was October 2019 to November 2021. So huge layoff in that one, 751 days. Then going from Holloway to Ortega, there was a 245-day layoff. Going from Ortega to Emmett, there was a 210-day layoff. And then going from the second Ortega fight to this fight, there'll be a 413-day layoff because he hasn't fought since the beginning of the year. So that's the 3rd longest layoff of his UFC career. He actually had another layoff going from Frankie Edgar to the Korean Zombie, which is 546 days. So that's one thing with Rodriguez is, again, he's fought the best of the best, but he's also hasn't been super active overall. If you look at some of the gaps in between his career, at least lately. I know earlier in his career he was fighting, a couple times a year, but since basically the pandemic, he hasn't been as active as I'm sure people would like. As far as the stats go with Yair Rodriguez, very impressive here. If you look at it there, he's got significant strikes landed per minute, 4.65. He's got takedown averages 0.69. His striking accuracy is at 46%. Doesn't hit the mark all the time. His striking defense is at 52, so he doesn't get hit a ton. Takedown accuracy only 27%. His takedown defense is at 58%, and his sub average is at 0.7. Again, one of the most exciting fighters on the UFC roster. And now let's take a look at his opponent, Patricio Pitbull Freire, making his UFC debut. So again, because we got a fighter coming over from Bellator, not a ton of UFC stuff to talk about, obviously, because he's making his debut. So obviously Pitbull not ranked. 36-7 record. He's got 12 knockouts, 12 submissions, and 12 decisions in his career. So it's a lot of fights. He's 37 years old. He's 5'6" with a 65.5-inch reach. So he's older and won't have a height or reach advantage in this fight. He trains out of the Pitbull gym. And he's the former Bellator lightweight world champion. He's also the former Bellator featherweight champion 3 separate times, which is pretty impressive. He's also got the most wins in Bellator history at 24. Pitbull did not have an amateur debut, made his pro debut way back in, and this is, again, I know he's older than Yair, but look at this, made his debut in March of 2004. So big difference in terms of Yair making his pro debut compared to Pitbull. Obviously going to be making his debut in UFC debut in 2025, made his Bellator debut back in 2010. So that was, April of 2010 against William Romero back in the day. Now, again, as far as notable victories go, he's fought a few fighters that are currently in the UFC or formerly in the UFC, but I thought for, normally I talk about like notable UFC fighters that he's fought. For this one, we'll talk about notable Bellator fighters he fought, and I'll give some context a little bit here if that helps out. So again, his Bellator record, Patricio Pitbull, was 24-6. He had 14 stoppage victories during that time. So say what you want about the competition he fought in Bellator, he was finishing a lot of fights. Some notable wins. Probably his most notable win to date is the Michael Chandler win, which was back in May of 2019. He got a first round finish there. It was a bit of, if you watch the fight, it's on YouTube. It was a bit on the back of the head there, but still to finish Chandler, that's got to be a nice feather in his cap, getting that win. Can't forget the win over AJ McKee in their rematch. Of course, he got choked out by AJ McKee the fight previously, wins the rematch. It was a close fight, but he ends up taking it. And then probably his most other notable win is Jeremy Kennedy, who people also forget Jeremy Kennedy was in the UFC. I believe he left the UFC with a winning record, just the one loss there to Alex Volkanovski. So that was a good win because, again, Kennedy was a lot younger. I believe he was the favorite in that fight, or at least was close to it. Kennedy was about a -115 favorite in that fight, and Pitbull finished him. So again, that's an impressive win. Got to mention that. As far as his notable losses, I'm going to mention these in terms of the context of Bellator, but lost to Joe Warren in a fight, which I think he actually won. That was a pretty close fight. And again, we're talking about a fight over more than a decade ago, about 15 years ago, that fight, but that's a fight he probably should have won. Pat Curran, I thought he won that fight, but again, Pat Curran was a tournament winner, a former champion, loses a split decision there. Same thing with Daniel Strauss, was a former champion. Lost to Benson Henderson. That was a leg injury, right? So, people looking like, oh, he lost to Henderson. Well, there was more of an injury than anything else. And then lost to AJ McKee in their first fight, but did defeat him in the rematch. And then lost to Sergio Pettis, which was at bantamweight, which I think is an interesting thing going into this fight, is that Patricio Pitbull actually fought at bantamweight when, how old was he? It was 2 years ago. So, he's in his mid-30s and he's still, able to cut the weight. So losing to Pettis, that's not really his weight class. So that was a notable loss as well. And then he also had a loss where he got knocked out in Rizin in a catchweight fight at 154 against Suzuki in Rizin. So we're not that far removed from that fight. So that's one other thing I did want to mention. Now, as far as notable layoffs, he's got a bit of a layoff going into this fight. We talked about Yair Rodriguez and his inactivity over the last couple of years. Going from Jeremy Kennedy, which was last March, to Yair Rodriguez, there will be a 415-day layoff going into this one. So he actually has a 2-day longer layoff than Yair Rodriguez, if my math's correct on that. Yair's got a 413-day layoff. Patricio Pitbull's going to have a 415-day layoff. So something interesting there. Now, I don't know how the UFC came up with this. You guys maybe let me in on the comments. I'm not entirely sure. They've come up with stats for Patricio Freire, which is interesting because usually, as far as I know, it's just based off UFC fights. So I don't know if they got this data from Bellator or what happened there, but you can see the significant strikes landed is 2.84. That seems a bit low to me. I mean, this is a guy who's got 12 knockouts in his career. I don't know how they came up with that number, but I would think he's getting a little bit more than that in terms of the overall strikes. Striking accuracy is at 41%. His striking defense is at 60%. So, and even that number seems a bit high to me. I think his striking defense would be a bit lower. There's been a bunch of fights that he's definitely, had some battles in. So I don't know how they came up with that. Takedown average 0.60. Takedown accuracy is at 18%. I would think he's got more than 18% worth of takedowns. And his takedown defense is at 94%. I'm trying to remember if he's been on the ground that much. Not really. So I don't know. Again, take this with a grain of salt. I don't know how accurate these stats are, but I would think his significant strikes landed per minute would be higher than 2.84. That seems low to me, but you guys let me know here in the comments. Okay, let's look at the odds right now. We only have one book that has odds right now. It's got Yair Rodriguez as almost a 2-to-1 favorite. Patricio Pitbull coming in at plus 145. And then if you look on Tapology, similar story here. I'm actually not similar story. I take that back. More people going with Rodriguez here, 75%. Most picking him by knockout, 35.4%. Most saying decision, though, at 62.8%. And then only 25% of people picking Pitbull. 31% picking him by knockout. That's interesting because Rodriguez, I think he's been knocked out like 3 times in his career. Decision, though, more likely 61%. So again, more slanted on the Tapology picks. And this is just where you can go in and pick. There's no, You don't have to bet any money, whereas the people who are actually betting money here. So it's kind of interesting. Okay, interesting fight. First and foremost, let me just say, and I did a video on this when this fight was announced, I'm just glad to see Pitbull in the UFC. This guy grinded his butt off in Bellator, and he was part of the Bjorn Rebney era and the Scott Coker era. This guy's an absolute legend. If you haven't caught up on the Patricio Pitbull, body of work, I suggest you go look at some of the stuff on YouTube. He's a very, very exciting fighter. Really nice guy too. So just throwing that out there, just as something, a personal thing for me. I really do enjoy watching him fight. But when it's all said and done, I do think Yair Rodriguez is going to win this fight. Now, this is I mentioned it there. If you look at this card, just one second here, let me figure this out. Just want to triple check that it's a 3-round fight. I'm pretty sure it is. I don't imagine they'd have a 5-round fight for this. So. It's a three round fight. Okay, so I think even if it was 5 rounds, either way, I'm still going to the side of Yair Rodriguez. So I think Rodriguez wins the decision here. Okay, a couple things. Now, first off, obviously Rodriguez, layoff coming into this fight. But when we want to keep this in the most simplest terms possible, Yair Rodriguez is younger. He's going to be bigger. He's also fought way better competition than Patricio Pitbull has, in my opinion. So that's got to count for something. Both have huge layoffs, so I think it kind of cancels each other out. In fact, I think for an older fighter, I think the layoff is worse for him as opposed to a younger fighter. One other thing to consider in this fight too, guys, is you look at the difference in fights. So granted, Rodriguez has fought better opposition. Pitbull has way more fights. He actually has 19 more fights than Yair Rodriguez. With that, though, has come some damage. He's been in some wars, guys. If you look at some of those fights that he's had, Daniel Weichel, Emmanuel Sanchez, they're fights where, he took some serious damage. So you got to think there's more wear and tear on Patricio Pitbull than Yair Rodriguez. Although you can even see this picture here. He's got some blood coming down here. Certainly taken some damage as well. But I think the damage factor is a little bit more on the Pitbull side here as well. And you look at the fact that Yair Rodriguez, this isn't a 5-round fight. He has won a decent amount of his fights by decision as well, too. I know people might think finish. That certainly could happen. Pitbull was knocked out just 2 fights ago by a fighter that, I don't know a ton about Suzuki, but I don't think, he's a 10-3 fighter. That's not a really good look, getting knocked out by him. Rodriguez does have knockout power, but this is a guy as well that hasn't really had like a clean knockout win since the Zombie fight, right? Wasn't able to finish Jeremy Stephens. We saw Stephens get finished after that by a couple opponents. The Ortega fight was more of an injury. And then the Emmett fight, he didn't knock him out. He submitted him. And I don't think he's going to submit Patricio Pitbull here. If you look at Pitbull's overall career, he's got 1 loss by submission in what? Almost like over 40 fights. So don't think that's going to happen here either. So maybe he knocks him out again, but again, we haven't seen a knockout from him in a while. I lean more decision, and I think you're going to get better odds that way too. So again, I just think what it comes down to is I think it's great that Patricio Pitbull's in the UFC. I just think he's meeting his match here with a fighter that, like I said, is going to be bigger, younger, faster, stronger, fought better opposition. Say what you want about Rodriguez and the bit of a slide he's been on. I think he should still win this fight. So my official pick in this fight is going to be Yair Rodriguez by decision. Would it be cool to see Pitbull surprise? Absolutely. I just don't think it happens at 37 years of age. I don't know what the stats are, but fighters over 35, unless it's heavyweight, typically don't win a lot of fights. So I'm going to go Yair Rodriguez by decision. That's going to be my official pick for this fight. So I want to know what you guys think in the comment section below. Which side are leading here? I think most are leaning Rodriguez. If you're on the Pitbull side, I would love to hear how you think he gets it done. If you're on the Rodriguez side, do you agree with me? Do you think it'll be decision, or do you see him being able to stop Patricio Pitbull? Let me know in the comments. Follow me on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, @Lynch on Sports. My name is James Lynch. This is Early Look. Quick note, I will be doing obviously all the other big fights on this card. This is a pretty stacked event, including Volk and Lopez, and got Chandler and Pimblett, so those will be coming out soon, but wanted to get this one out of the way just because I do think it's I think it's an underrated fight, honestly, because you talk about some of the big matchups that are coming up. Just have Pitbull in the UFC, very cool. So again, follow me on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, @Lynch on Sports. My name's James Lynch. I'm rambling on here. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.